When she walked away, she thought she broke only one man's heart. But what she didn't know was that she left behind 3 children who would need him for everything. And he, a father with nothing, made a promise that would change. There lives forever. This is not just a story of survival. It is the story of how one broken man became the greatest father in the world. It was an ordinary evening in small-town America. The kind of evening where families sit together at the dinner table, children laugh over their homework, and fathers return home tired, but happy to the sound of little feet running to the door. But in one quiet house, that sound would never be the same again. She didn't slam the door. She didn't scream or cry. She just left one small suitcase. One heavy silence. And behind her, 3 children staring at the doorway, waiting for their mother to turn back. But she never did. That night everything changed. He stood there, stunned, heartbroken, betrayed, not for himself, but for the 3 little faces now looking up at him, confused and afraid. How do you explain to a child that their mother is gone? How do you hold their tears when your own heart is breaking? That night, he promised himself one thing. I will not let them feel abandoned. I will not let them feel unloved. If she walked away, I will become everything they need. But promises are easier than reality. Bills piled up. Food ran short. The job barely paid enough for one mouth, let alone 4. Neighbors whispered. Some offered pity, others scorn. How will he manage without her? They said. He heard it all. But each night, he tucked his children into bed, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, "Don't worry. Daddy's here. Daddy will always be here." Yet deep inside, he asked himself, how long could he keep that promise? How long before the weight of the world crushed him? Because while his children slept peacefully, he stayed awake, staring at the empty side of the bed, wondering if love alone was enough to fight hunger, loneliness, and despair. The first week after she left felt like a blur. The house was quieter, colder. Children cried at night, asking for their mother. And he had no answers. Only a heart heavy with pain. But soon, grief turned into reality. The rent was due. The electric company wanted payment. Groceries were running out. His paycheck once enough to balance 2 incomes now vanished in a single day. At the grocery store, he stood with a handful of coins, calculating what he could afford. Bread, milk, maybe a few eggs. No treats, no extras. And when the cashier looked at him with pity, he felt a sting of shame. But he held his head high. Because his children would not see their father break, he learned to eat less, sometimes nothing at all. If there was food, it went to the children first. They never knew that while they ate, he drank water to fill his stomach. He smiled through the hunger, told them he was just not hungry tonight. But when the lights were out, when the children were asleep, he sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty plates. Fighting the tears, the neighbors noticed. Some whispered behind curtains, "She won't come back. He can't raise them alone. Poor kids, what will happen to them?" Others offered help, but pride kept him standing tall. He didn't want charity. He wanted dignity. Every word cut deep, but he used the pain as fuel. Because each cruel whisper was a reminder, he had to prove them wrong. One evening, his youngest daughter asked quietly, "Daddy, are you going to leave too?" His chest tightened, tears welled in his eyes, but he pulled her close and said firmly, "No, sweetheart, I will never leave you. I will always be here. Always. And in that moment, he knew, no matter how much it cost him, no matter how deep the struggle, he would endure it all. But the real test was only beginning. Because soon, life would force him to make choices no father should ever face. Should he keep his pride? Or beg for help? Should he work longer hours? Even if it meant leaving the children alone. And how long could a man break himself apart before something finally gave way? The days grew longer, the nights even longer. With one paycheck gone, he had no choice but to take on extra work. The factory shifts weren't enough anymore. So after 8 hours of labor, he picked up another job, sweeping floors at night, fixing shelves at a store. Anything that would keep the lights on and the children fed. His life became a cycle. Work, rush home, cook dinner, help with homework, tuck the children into bed, then back out into the cold night for another shift. By the time he returned, the sun was rising. While the children slept peacefully, their father sat slumped at the kitchen table, eyes heavy, heart heavy, hands cracked and sore. Sleep became a luxury he could no longer afford. There were nights when he broke. Alone in the darkness, he let the tears fall, not because he was weak, but because he carried a weight too heavy for one man. He missed her, not for himself, but for the children. He missed the laughter that once filled the house, now only silence, and his own exhausted sighs. But every time he felt like giving up, he remembered the promise he made. Daddy will always be here. And it was the little moments that kept him alive. His son's smile when he came home late at night. His daughter's tiny hands holding his face, whispering, "I love you, Daddy." Those words were his fuel, his shield, his reason to keep fighting when the world told him to give up. But his body was breaking. Dark circles under his eyes, calloused hands aching back. Sometimes he fell asleep at the dinner table, face resting in his arms, while the children giggled softly and tried not to wake him. He was there. But every day, it was costing him a piece of himself. How long could he keep living like this? How long before his body gave up, or worse, before life forced him to make an impossible choice? Because survival wasn't just about love anymore. It was about endurance, and even the strongest hearts can only endure so much. He thought he could handle it. The endless shifts, the long nights, the weight of 3 children on his tired shoulders. But there comes a moment when even the strongest heart begins to crack. One winter evening, the electricity bill went unpaid. The lights went out. The house plunged into darkness. The children huddled together, scared. He lit a single candle and set it on the table, forcing a smile. "It's just a little adventure," he whispered. But inside, shame burned hotter than the flame. He had failed. And his children could see it. The heating bill was next. That winter, the house was bitterly cold. He wrapped the children in blankets, tucked them close, and gave them his own coat to keep warm. He shivered all night, his breath visible in the freezing air, but he didn't care. As long as they slept peacefully, his suffering didn't matter. Then came the grocery store again. He stood in line with a few dollars in his pocket, bread, milk. That was all he could afford. His youngest begged softly, "Daddy, can we have cookies?" He froze. The answer should have been simple. But looking down at her hopeful eyes, his heart shattered. He forced a smile and said, "Not today, sweetheart, but one day soon." And as they walked out with only bread and milk, he silently vowed, "One day I will give them more than this. One day they will never have to ask again. At night, when the children were asleep, he sat alone at the kitchen table, the candle burning low, his head in his hands, his heart screaming in silence. He had become both mother and father, protector and provider, but the cost was tearing them apart. And then came the moment that nearly broke him completely. A phone call, a letter, a reminder that the world doesn't stop hurting you just because you're already hurting. What was written on that page would push him closer to the edge than ever before. It was a cold morning. Frost on the windows. Children still asleep, bundled under blankets. He walked out to the porch, rubbing his tired eyes when he saw it, an envelope, plain, white, his name scrawled across the front. He didn't know then, but that letter would pierce deeper than any winter chill. His hands trembled as he tore it open. Inside, a single page. The words were sharp, cold, like a knife straight to his heart. It was from her. The woman who had walked away. The mother who left her children behind. She wrote that she was happy now, that she had moved on, and worst of all, she wrote that she didn't want contact with the children. Now. Not ever. His knees nearly buckled. How could a mother erase her own children? How could she pretend they never existed? He clutched the letter, fighting back tears, because in the next room his children were waking. They didn't need to see his pain. They didn't need to know this truth. He burned the letter in the sink, watching the flames devour every word. Then he stood taller, forcing himself to smile, because his children deserved hope, not heartbreak. But children are not blind. That morning, his eldest son asked, "Daddy, do you think Mommy will ever come back?" For a moment, he froze. His throat tightened. His heart screamed the truth. No. But he couldn't say it. So he pulled his son close and whispered, "No matter what happens, I will always be here. That's what matters." The letter broke him, but it also lit a fire. If she had abandoned them completely, then he would raise them completely. No more waiting. No more hoping. From that day forward, he stopped looking back. The past was gone. Only the future remained, but the road ahead would not be easier. Because as he worked himself to the bone, his health began to falter. And soon, his body would remind him that even heroes have limits. Every morning, he dragged himself out of bed before the sun. His body ached. His back throbbed. His hands, once steady, now shook from exhaustion. But when he peeked into his children's room and saw their tiny bodies curled under blankets, he whispered to himself, "Keep going, for them." The factory was loud, harsh. The machines roared. The air was heavy with dust and sweat. He worked double shifts, sometimes triple. 12 hours, 14 hours. His co-workers noticed the shadows under his eyes, the way he coughed into his sleeve. "Take a break," they told him. But he couldn't, because a father doesn't rest when his children need him. He made sure the fridge had milk, bread, fruit, whatever he could afford. But his own meals grew smaller and smaller. Many nights, he told the children he had already eaten at work. But the truth, he went to bed with an empty stomach so they wouldn't. He bore the hunger like a secret cross, never complaining, never letting them know. Then came the warning. One morning at work, his vision blurred. The room spun. His knees buckled, and he collapsed against a machine. The foreman rushed over, but he waved it off. "Just tired," he said with a faint smile. But inside, fear gripped him. His body was failing. And yet he had no choice but to keep pushing Dot at home. The children noticed. "Daddy, you're so tired all the time." He forced a grin, ruffling their hair. "Daddy's just strong, strong like Superman." But late at night, when they were asleep, he sat alone on the porch, coughing into his hands, staring at the stars, praying silently for the strength to make it through another day, because deep down, he knew the truth. A man can fight hunger. A man can fight loneliness. But can he fight his own breaking body? And if he couldn't, what would happen to his children then? It started small. A cough that wouldn't stop. A headache that never went away. But soon, his body began to betray him. One night, after a 14-hour shift, he walked into the house, dinner still waiting on the stove. The children ran to him, arms wide, smiles bright. But before he could hug them, his knees buckled. He collapsed to the floor. The children screamed, "Daddy, Daddy!" They shook him, tears streaming down their faces, until finally he opened his eyes, weak, pale, but still fighting to smile. The neighbors rushed in, called for help. Soon, he was lying in a hospital bed. Machines beeped around him. Doctors whispered words like exhaustion and malnutrition. He hated every second of it. Not the pain, but the sight of his children standing at the doorway, clutching each other, terrified that they might lose the only parent they had left. That night, he held their tiny hands and whispered, "Don't you cry. Daddy's not going anywhere. Daddy's too stubborn to leave." But deep inside, fear clawed at him. What if he couldn't keep that promise? What if tomorrow he wasn't there to tuck them in? And then something happened. The eldest son placed a hand on his father's chest and whispered, "You don't have to be Superman, Daddy. Just stay with us. That's all we want." The youngest kissed his cheek and said softly, "You're already the best daddy in the world." Those words hit harder than any medicine. They stitched his broken spirit back together. Because he realized he didn't have to be perfect. He just had to be theirs. But the world wasn't done testing him. Because after the hospital came the bills. And after the bills came a choice that would change everything. Would he risk everything to keep the house? Or lose the only home his children had ever known? The hospital released him with warnings. Rest, slow down. Take care of yourself. But rest was a luxury he could not afford. Because waiting at home was a stack of envelopes, red letters, final notices, bills demanding money he didn't have. And on top of the pile, an eviction notice. The words burned into his eyes. Failure to pay will result in removal from the property. In simple terms, they were about to lose their home. The house wasn't perfect. It was old, creaky, drafty in winter. But it was the only safe place his children had. The only corner of the world that was theirs. And now, even that was slipping away. He hid the letters in a drawer, away from curious eyes. The children didn't need to know. To them, this house was still a castle, a place of laughter and safety. So he smiled. He played games. He tucked them into bed with stories, even as his own chest ached with fear. But every night, when the lights were out, he sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the notice, wondering how much longer he could keep the walls around them standing. He begged for extra shifts, took on odd jobs, mowing lawns, fixing fences, repairing anything neighbors would pay him for. His hands bled, his back screamed. But still, it wasn't enough. Every dollar he earned vanished into bills, leaving nothing behind. And the deadline grew closer. Then, one evening, his youngest came to him with a tiny jar filled with coins. Pennies, nickels, dimes, her treasure. "Here, Daddy," she whispered. "Now you don't have to worry. We can pay." His heart shattered. Tears burned his eyes as he pulled her close. Because in that moment, he realized he wasn't just fighting for them. They were fighting for him too, but love doesn't pay the bills. And the deadline was just days away. Would this father manage to save their home? Or would his children wake up one morning to find everything they had gone? The deadline was just days away. The eviction notice haunted him like a shadow. Every knock on the door made his heart race, fearing it was the landlord. He prayed. He begged silently to the heavens, "Don't take their home. Please, not this too." And just when it felt like the world was about to crush him completely, something happened. It came from the most unlikely place. An old friend, a man he hadn't spoken to in years, showed up at his door. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "I heard you're struggling." At first, pride rose in his chest. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to stand tall. But then he looked at his children, their wide eyes, their fragile little smiles, and he swallowed his pride. The friend pressed a folded check into his hand. Not charity, not pity, just love. That night, for the first time in months, he slept without fear. The roof above them was safe, at least for now. But more than the money, it was the realization that broke him in a different way. He wasn't alone. Even in the darkest nights, there were people who cared. People who believed in him. The next morning, he cooked a proper breakfast, eggs, toast, even a small box of cookies he had saved. When the children saw it, their eyes lit up. "Daddy, cookies!" It was such a simple thing. But to them, it was everything. And to him, it was proof that maybe, just maybe, things could change. From that day forward, he still worked hard. He still sacrificed. But something inside him had shifted. He no longer carried the weight alone. He no longer fought only with fear. Now he fought with hope. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness can save a whole family. But this story wasn't over yet. Because while survival was hard enough, the real question was, would these children grow up remembering the pain? Or the love that carried them through it? Years passed. The little children who once clung to his arms grew taller, stronger. The house that once echoed with fear and hunger slowly filled with laughter again. But the sacrifices he made never faded. They were stitched into the fabric of their lives. The eldest son got into college. The daughter learned to play piano, her music filling the small home with hope. The youngest, once the baby of the house, grew into a confident young soul who often said, "My daddy can do anything." Each success, each smile, was built on the back of one man's endless sacrifice. He never asked for thanks, never demanded recognition. When neighbors praised him, he shrugged it off. When people called him a hero, he only said, "I just did what any father should do." But his children knew. They knew the truth. They knew he had been mother and father, protector and provider, teacher and friend. He wasn't just any father. He was theirs. As he grew older, the years of sacrifice showed in his body. His back bent, his hands rough, his hair turned gray too soon. But in his eyes burned the same fire, the same promise he made on that first night when their mother walked away. "I will never leave you." And he never did. On graduation day, his children stood tall, dressed in caps and gowns. They looked out into the crowd, and there he was, tears shining in his eyes, pride swelling in his chest. In that moment, everything he had endured, the hunger, The pain, the sleepless nights, all of it was worth it. Because his children had made it. And they knew it was because of him. Years later, when people asked his children about their lives, they didn't talk about the hardships. They didn't talk about the nights without heat or the empty cupboards. They talked about their father, about his strength, about his love, about how one man, abandoned and broken, chose to rise. And in doing so, gave them everything. And that became his legacy. Not the struggles, not the suffering, but the love that never gave up. This is not just the story of a man. This is the story of a father who became everything. A man who showed the world that true strength is not measured in muscle or money, but in love, in sacrifice, and in the promise to never let go.